My 16-year-old and her friends like the movie, the screening, the best, which I take to be, but also great good hope for interest in talking about stuff.
At 76, Meryl Streep has finally chosen to break her silence, and what she's revealed about Robert Redford has left Hollywood shaken. For decades, the two legendary actors shared the screen, captivating audiences with their timeless performances. But behind the glamorous curtain of fame lay stories far darker than anyone imagined. Meryl's shocking revelations pull back the veil on Redford's hidden past, exposing secrets that could forever change how the world remembers him. What exactly did she uncover? The answers may leave you speechless. Meryl Streep's stunning revelation. To Meryl Streep, Robert Redford had always appeared as the very picture of grace and control. On screen and in person, he carried himself with a quiet authority, the kind of elegance that felt untouchable. To her, he was the man who seemed born to play noble heroes and thoughtful dreamers, someone who never appeared ruffled by the chaos around him. His calm presence was almost magnetic, the kind of poise one would expect from a figure sculpted by destiny itself. Yet at 76, Streep confessed that she had been utterly stunned when she finally uncovered the hidden truth about his youth. The man who, in her mind, had always embodied refinement, had once lived a life that was anything but polished. Long before Hollywood carved his name into legend, Robert Redford had been a boy struggling to find his place, far removed from the glamour of film sets and red carpets. As a teenager growing up in Van Nuys, California, his reality was far rougher than anyone could have guessed. The future Hollywood star moved in circles that thrived on risk, running with a street gang that measured loyalty and courage through dangerous stunts. These were boys who fed on adrenaline, daring one another into reckless acts that blurred the line between thrill and survival. For Redford, it was a world where fear had no place, and hesitation was seen as weakness. The most harrowing test came one fateful day when he was ordered to prove his courage in a way that bordered on madness. To remain part of the group, he had to leap from the roof of a tall building, a stunt that could have easily cost him his life. It was not a staged scene, no carefully calculated risk with cameras rolling and stuntmen on standby. It was real, raw, and terrifying, and against all odds, he survived the fall. This hidden chapter of his life left Meryl Streep in disbelief. The Robert Redford she had come to know through decades of cinematic brilliance seemed worlds apart from the reckless boy who once gambled with death just to earn acceptance. "It's hard to believe," she admitted, "that the man I knew so well on screen had once risked everything in such a reckless way." That revelation painted Redford in a new, almost haunting light, a reminder that even the most composed figures often carry untold stories in their past. Behind the calm veneer of a Hollywood icon was once a boy daring fate, a young man shaped not only by charm and talent, but by brushes with danger that few would ever imagine. Meryl revealed a secret that once brought Robert terrifyingly close to death. But could there be another secret where a life was tragically lost? Whose life slipped away, and what heartbreaking cause lay behind it? Now let's uncover the silent grief of a father who lost his son before the world ever knew his name. Robert Redford's darkest secret. Of all the secrets Robert Redford kept locked away, one stood apart as the darkest, the one that weighed most heavily on his heart. It was not a scandal of Hollywood, nor a reckless adventure from his wild youth, but a deeply personal tragedy he carried in silence for decades. In 1959, when Redford was still finding his way in life and in career, he stepped into fatherhood for the very first time. It should have been a season of joy, filled with the sounds of lullabies and laughter. Yet in a cruel twist of fate, that happiness was ripped from him almost as quickly as it had arrived. Robert Redford's first child, a baby boy named Scott, lived for only 10 weeks. His sudden death shattered Redford's young family, leaving behind invisible wounds that would never fully heal. At the time, no clear answers existed. Doctors could only shrug, unable to explain why a healthy baby could slip away overnight. Decades later, the tragedy would be recognized as Sudden Infant Death Syndrome, or SIDS. But in 1959, it was nothing more than a cruel mystery. For a young father just beginning his journey in life, the loss was almost too heavy to bear. Meryl Streep spoke about how deeply that loss marked Robert Redford's life. To the public eye, he was the picture of steadiness, a man who carried himself with calm strength, always appearing unshaken, always in control. But behind that composed image rested a wound that time could never fully heal. Streep noted that he carried his sorrow silently, as though it never left him. And perhaps it never did, becoming a hidden part of his strength and the soul behind his art. Redford himself admitted that the tragedy haunted him. He confessed that in the quiet corners of his mind, he often blamed himself. What if he had checked on the baby sooner? What if he had noticed something was wrong in time? Such questions, of course, had no answers, but guilt is rarely rational. For Redford, it became a shadow that followed him, even as his career soared and the world celebrated him as one of Hollywood's most admired figures. The death of his son was more than a private sorrow. It was the kind of loss that reshapes a man from the inside out. Those who knew him well sensed that much of his drive, his relentless need to channel truth and vulnerability into his performances, came from wounds the public never saw. Every triumph he achieved carried with it the silent echo of a child's brief life, and every smile concealed the memory of a grief that time never fully erased. Robert Redford's darkest secret was not about scandal or fame, but the quiet pain of losing his son. But could there also be a child who survived against all odds? Now, let's uncover Robert Redford's near-double tragedy. A brush with death. Just 3 years after the devastating loss of his first child, Robert Redford once again found himself standing at the edge of tragedy. Life, it seemed, was not done testing him. When his second son, James, came into the world, his arrival was marked not by celebration, but by fear. James was born far too soon, his tiny body frail, his cries faint, and doctors offered no comforting reassurances. They warned Redford and his young wife, Lola, that the odds were stacked against them. The baby's chance of survival was barely 40%. The room that should have been filled with the joy of new life instead echoed with the heavy silence of uncertainty. Every hour was a battle, every day a fragile victory. Redford, still carrying the scars of losing his first child, could hardly bear the thought of another goodbye. To watch another son slip away before life even had the chance to begin would have been more than he could endure. But the danger did not rest solely on James. Lola herself nearly lost her life during childbirth. Her strength, too, was tested in ways few could imagine. The young couple faced the possibility of losing everything in a single night. A son fighting for breath, a wife clinging to life. For Redford, the weight was unbearable, to be a husband and father on the brink of a double loss. And yet, against all odds, both mother and child survived. James, though fragile at first, pulled through with a quiet resilience that would define much of his life. Lola recovered, though the ordeal left its mark on her just as deeply as it had on her husband. Together, they emerged from the shadow of death with gratitude but also with an unshakable awareness of how fragile life truly is. Meryl Streep, who came to know Redford well, often reflected on how those early wounds shaped the man behind the actor. She believed that these brushes with loss carved out a depth in him that audiences could always sense, even if they didn't know why. He understood fragility in a way few men ever could, she revealed. That understanding, she felt, was not learned in books or on film sets. It was forged in the fire of near unbearable grief and the miracle of survival. For Robert Redford, those early years of fatherhood were not marked solely by joy, but by a profound confrontation with life's most delicate balance. It was a reminder that every moment is borrowed, every bond precious, and every breath uncertain. And it was this knowledge, etched deep within him, that gave his calm strength and quiet humanity a truth few could ever replicate. Robert escaped the pain of losing both his child and his wife to death. But how long did he truly share life with his wife? Did their love last until the end? Or did separation come along the way? Now let's unravel how a love that endured tragedy and 3 decades together quietly ended in silence. The quiet collapse of Robert Redford's marriage. To the outside world, Robert Redford's marriage to Lola von Wagenen seemed unshakable. For nearly 3 decades they stood side by side, weathering storms that would have torn many couples apart. Together, they endured heartbreaks that left deep scars, including the devastating loss of their first child. Yet from that pain, they built a family, raising 3 more children, while creating a home that, at least from a distance, looked like a picture of strength and stability. To fans and admirers, their relationship was the stuff of admiration, a union that appeared to defy the odds of Hollywood's fleeting romances. Redford, the golden boy of American cinema, and Lola, the intelligent, steady presence behind him, seemed to balance each other perfectly. They shared a history rooted not in fame, but in the struggles of ordinary life, and many assumed that history would carry them through forever. Appearances, however, can often hide the truth. By the mid-1980s, the marriage that had once looked unbreakable slowly began to falter. The cracks, hidden for years, widened quietly until the bond could no longer hold. There were no tabloid scandals, no explosive fights splashed across headlines, only silence. Away from flashing cameras, Robert Redford and his wife chose separation, their love story ending not with noise, but with a whisper. It was the quiet unraveling of a partnership that once seemed destined to last forever. For nearly a decade, little was said. Redford continued his work, and Lola, too, carried on with her life. Then, finally, they announced what had long been whispered about. Their divorce was official. The news rippled through both Hollywood and the public, not because of scandal, but because of disbelief. How could a marriage that had appeared so enduring, so different from the usual Hollywood tales, simply come to an end? Meryl Streep later reflected on the moment, admitting she, too, was shocked. She had always seen Redford as a man of great steadiness, someone whose life, though tested, remained anchored by loyalty and love. To her, the quiet dissolution of his marriage was a reminder of a truth often forgotten. Even legends carry wounds the world never sees. The strength he showed in public, the calm authority he embodied on screen, concealed private struggles that were just as real as anyone else's. For Redford, the end of his marriage was not a failure, but another chapter in a life marked by resilience. He and Lola had shared love, loss, and years of family together. But sometimes even the strongest partnerships reach their limit. To outsiders, it was a surprise. To Redford, it was simply part of the human story, proof that no one, not even the most admired figures, lives untouched by the quiet ache of endings. But how did Meryl come to know these secrets more than anyone else? What was her true relationship with Robert? Now, let's explore how Meryl Streep and Robert Redford forged an unbreakable bond through art, trust, and timeless on-screen magic. Bond beyond the screen. The connection between Meryl Streep and Robert Redford was not born of gossip, scandal, or fleeting moments. It was forged in the demanding fires of art itself. In 1985, they stepped into roles that would forever define their on-screen legacy. Starring together in the sweeping epic Out of Africa, Streep embodied Karen Blixen, the strong yet vulnerable Danish writer, while Redford breathed life into Dennis Finch Hatton, the adventurous, free-spirited hunter. What unfolded on screen was not just a performance, but one of cinema's most enduring portrayals of romance. The chemistry between them was so natural, so unforced, that audiences across the world believed it must have sprung from something more than acting. Even director Sidney Pollack found himself at times frustrated. Not because the performances lacked spark, but because their connection seemed so instinctive, so magnetic, that capturing it on camera almost felt like chasing lightning. Every glance, every quiet moment between them carried a weight that words could not hold. They did not simply act love, they seemed to inhabit it. And yet, away from the glow of cameras and the fantasies of audiences, Meryl Streep and Robert Redford's connection was never about romance. There were no scandals, no whispered love affairs, no secret meetings hidden from view. What they shared was something far rarer, a bond built on mutual trust, artistic respect, and an unspoken understanding of vulnerability. Streep brought precision and emotional intensity, while Redford offered quiet charisma and natural ease. Rather than compete, they reflected each other's strengths like perfect mirrors. Together, they didn't just act, they created a kind of cinematic magic that still lingers today. Decades later, when time had lined their faces and the weight of experience had shaped them both, they reunited on screen in Lions for Lambs, 2007. This time, they were no longer young lovers in a sweeping romance, but seasoned performers tackling weightier, more complex themes. The dynamic had shifted, but the bond was still there, unspoken yet undeniable. Their scenes carried not the urgency of passion, but the wisdom of mutual respect, the steady rhythm of two artists who had weathered the storms of fame and life, and emerged with a creative kinship that could not be broken. For Meryl Streep and Robert Redford, the bond they shared was not the stuff of tabloids, but something rarer, a partnership defined by trust, respect, and an almost spiritual understanding of one another's craft. Redford himself once admitted that whatever it was between them, it could not be denied. It was not love in the traditional sense, but it was no less profound. Their bond showed that the strongest connections aren't always romantic, but born from art and storytelling. Yet what other secret did Meryl reveal? And how did it shape Robert's life forever? Now, let's uncover Robert Redford's secret battle with polio, the silent enemy. Few fans ever suspected that Robert Redford's calm strength, the very quality that made him so magnetic on screen, had its roots in a childhood scar few would wish to bear. Long before Hollywood ever whispered his name, Redford faced an illness that nearly shattered him. At just 11 years old, while enjoying what should have been a carefree day at the ocean, his life took a terrifying turn. In the middle of a swim, his body suddenly gave way. He collapsed in the water, unable to move, his young muscles betrayed by a disease no one fully understood at the time: polio. For weeks, the boy who would one day grow into a Hollywood legend lay confined to a bed, locked in a body that no longer obeyed him. Each day was uncertain. Would he walk again? Would he run, swim, or play like other children? The questions were endless, the answers painfully unclear. Redford, full of youthful energy and mischief before the illness, suddenly had to confront the fragility of life long before most boys his age ever thought of it. Polio was a shadow that haunted families across America in those years. It struck without warning, robbing children of movement, sometimes of life itself. For Redford, it was a cruel initiation into the reality that nothing, not even health, could be taken for granted. But even as the disease tried to break him, it also planted in him something far more enduring: resilience. Slowly, painfully, he recovered. The boy who had once been paralyzed by fear and weakness began to rebuild step by step with a determination that would mark him for the rest of his life. Decades later, Robert Redford paid tribute to Jonas Salk, the brilliant scientist whose vaccine ended the polio epidemic. In honoring Salk, he was also honoring the chance at life that so many children, including himself, had been granted. To the world, it appeared a fitting gesture of gratitude, a public salute to science and survival. Yet for Meryl Streep, who had come to know Redford beyond the lights and applause, the meaning ran far deeper. It was not just history. It was his own silent battle made visible. For her, the true significance of that childhood illness wasn't about medicine or even survival. It was about character. That illness shaped him, she reflected. It gave him a quiet strength and an empathy that never left him. In her eyes, the resilience forged in those lonely weeks of immobility became the bedrock of the man he later became. It allowed him to embody characters with authenticity, to approach life with humility, and to carry within him an unspoken understanding of vulnerability. The boy, once weakened by polio, grew into a man who looked unbreakable. But how did he test that strength, and what price did he pay? Now let's uncover Robert Redford's wild college years. The reckless student. Even after Robert Redford left behind the dangerous dares of his street gang days, that restless energy inside him refused to disappear. Instead, it followed him into young adulthood, where it found new ground to grow. By the time he entered the University of Colorado on an art scholarship, Redford was not remembered for sitting quietly in lecture halls or excelling in his studies. Instead, he quickly earned a reputation of a very different kind. On campus, he was known less as a student and more as a wild spirit, someone who lived on the edge, often chasing thrills instead of textbooks. Parties became his classrooms, and late nights his lectures. He drank heavily, tested boundaries, and carried himself with the unpredictable aura of a loose cannon. Friends admired his charisma, but also recognized his unpredictability. You never quite knew whether Redford would turn a casual evening into a reckless adventure or a harmless prank into a near disaster. For Robert Redford, his wild youth was never mere rebellion. It was a deep, restless hunger for freedom. Following rules and staying on the path set for him felt like chains around his spirit, stifling his very essence. While others focused on steady careers and predictable lives, Redford chased risk and adventure, drawn to the thrill of the unknown. His daring ways fascinated friends and peers, marking him as unforgettable. Yet every reckless choice carried consequences. Behind the charm and excitement, there was a cost he would eventually have to face. In just 18 months, Robert Redford's reckless streak finally caught up with him. The University of Colorado, unwilling to overlook his wild behavior and lack of discipline, made the difficult decision to expel him. For most, such an expulsion would have been a crushing humiliation, a mark of failure hard to shake. For Redford, however, it was just another unpredictable twist in a life already full of surprises and challenges. Rather than breaking him, it became part of the journey that would shape the man he was destined to become. When Meryl Streep later reflected on this chapter of his life, she admitted she was surprised. The Robert Redford she had come to know, composed, elegant, steady, seemed worlds away from the reckless young man who once drank too much and pushed every boundary he could find. Yet, in another way, she understood it perfectly. Robert was never meant to walk the safe path, she explained. To her, his expulsion was not a failure but a sign of his restless soul, a refusal to settle for ordinary. This chapter of Robert Redford's life, reckless and untamed, helped forge the man who would later command screens with effortless authority. Beneath his calm exterior lay a history filled with daring choices, mistakes, and risks, taken without hesitation. Each misstep, every wild adventure had shaped him, teaching lessons that no classroom ever could. Perhaps this was the source of his magnetic charm, a man who had faced danger, embraced failure, and carried those hard-earned lessons into adulthood. His strength and allure were born from a life lived boldly, without fear of breaking the rules. So, what do you think about Robert Redford following the Darkest Secrets revelation? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.